single step into the unknown can change a life forever. Elara, a young storyteller, felt the weight of that step as she left her village behind, driven by a longing for the lost wisdom of the Golden Age. Her grandmother's tale spoke of a place called the Whispering Glade, a sanctuary where ancient harmony still echoed, a truth her community now dismissed as mere fairy tales. By the end of her journey, you will understand how forgotten wisdom can be recovered to heal a fractured world. What secrets did the Glade protect? And could one person's faith really restore a legacy that time had almost erased? I would love to know if you feel like sharing where you are listening from and what the local time is for you right now. What part of a forgotten past do you think is most worth rediscovering today? The worn leather of her grandmother's journal felt solid and real in her hand, a tangible anchor as the last familiar rooftops disappeared behind the dense wall of ancient trees. Each step away from the village was a step deeper into a world of tangled roots and shifting light, whispers of doubt as persistent as the rustling leaves coiled in her mind. Were the elders right? Was she chasing a child's fantasy, risking her safety for a song sung to soothe restless children? The path, once clear and welcoming, now seemed to twist and narrow with deliberate mischief. Every gnarled branch a grasping hand, and every unfamiliar cry from the deep woods a warning. Yet, her fingers traced the journal's embossed cover, remembering the unwavering certainty in her grandmother's voice when she spoke of the Glade's harmony. It was that memory, not the fearful murmurs of the villagers, that she chose to trust. She adjusted the strap of her satchel and pressed forward, her commitment hardening with each uncertain step. The way became fainter, a ghost of a trail barely visible beneath the undergrowth, a clear sign that the journey would demand more than mere footsteps. It would require a faith strong enough to walk where no path existed. As the sun climbed higher, a new sound reached her ears, the gentle, persistent flow of water, drawing her toward a hidden stream and the next stage of her journey. The water flowed with a soft, inner luminescence, like liquid moonlight gathered in the heart of the earth. Alara knelt at the bank, her reflection shimmering in the gentle light. The moss-covered stones were treacherously slick, and she had to plant her feet carefully, each movement a deliberate act of balance against the tug of the current. Leaning forward, she cupped her hands and brought the cool water to her lips. A profound stillness, clear and sharp, washed through her, not just calming her fears but sharpening her senses until every leaf and insect's wing seemed etched in perfect detail. This was no simple refreshment. It was a confirmation. Her grandmother's stories were not just memories, they were a living truth, and she had just tasted it. All fatigue melted away, replaced by a resonant energy that solidified her purpose. This stream was a guide, a silver thread leading back to the source. The logical choice was clear: follow the current upstream, toward its origin. The stakes were now intimately personal. This was no longer a quest to validate a tale for her village, but a journey to connect with a power that offered genuine healing and clarity. Its potential was too vital to abandon. Following the stream's quiet melody, she soon found herself at the edge of a vast, silent forest, where the very air seemed to hum with waiting knowledge. The air within the silent forest felt thick and heavy, swallowing every sound before it could truly form. Alara's own breathing seemed to vanish into the deep, dappled green light filtering through the canopy far above. She moved with painstaking care, placing each foot with deliberate softness to avoid the sharp snap of a twig, feeling that to disturb this profound peace would be a kind of sacrilege. It was in this enforced quiet that she began to truly see. The moss-covered stones were not merely rocks, they were resting forms, their surfaces holding the patience of centuries. The gnarled, twisted trees were not simply wood, but ancient sentinels in a deep and dreaming slumber. As she passed, a soft, collective sigh seemed to ripple through the clearing, a gentle acknowledgement of her respectful presence. Yet this very acknowledgement brought a wave of crushing insignificance. The sheer weight of time here, the immense age pressing in from all sides, whispered that she was a fleeting moment in an eternal story, utterly unworthy of seeking its secrets. The temptation to retreat, to leave this sacred space undisturbed by her transient life, pulled at her with surprising strength. Instead of pushing forward against the weight of her doubt, Alara chose to stop. She settled at the base of the largest sentinel, folded her hands in her lap, and closed her eyes. She would not demand answers. She would simply listen, opening her mind to the forest's energy with humility. The quest was no longer about finding a place. It was about forming a relationship. Failing to connect here would mean the journey ended before it had truly begun, severing the fragile thread she had followed from the luminous stream. As her meditation deepened, quieting the inner voice that spoke of unworthiness, one particularly ancient tree seemed to stir. Its deeply furrowed bark shifted almost imperceptibly, the patterns rearranging to form a faint, glowing path that led deeper into the waiting woods. The glowing path led Elara to a grove where the air grew still and heavy. Before her stood the ancient tree, its bark a tapestry of deep grooves that seemed to hold the memory of countless seasons. A voice, not heard with ears but felt within the mind, spoke with the slow rumble of shifting stone. It showed her a vision, not of the past, but of a troubling present. A vast field lay before her inner eye, its soil cracked and barren, its crops withered. The people tending it moved with a weary sorrow, their faces etched with the hardship of a land that would no longer provide. They fought against the earth, trying to force it to yield, and in their struggle, they only deepened the blight. The guardian's silent question echoed in her soul. How would you restore the harmony here? Her mind raced, searching for a clever answer, a grand solution fit for a legend. But the pressure of the moment stripped all that away, leaving only the simple truths she had learned at her grandmother's knee. She did not speak of forcing the land to obey. Instead, she answered from a place of deep conviction. True healing, she offered, begins not with command, but with listening. She would teach the community to hear the story the land was trying to tell, to understand the flow of its water, the needs of its soil, and the rhythms of its seasons. They must work with the land as a partner, not a servant, nurturing it so it could, in turn, nurture them. A profound warmth emanated from the ancient tree, a clear and resonant approval. Her answer, born of genuine belief rather than invented cleverness, had proven her worth. The guardian's test was not about knowledge, but about the nature of her heart. The path before her shimmered, the very stones underfoot beginning to glow with a soft, golden light. Yet this victory came with a weight far greater than she had anticipated. She was no longer just a seeker of wisdom. By speaking its principles aloud and having them accepted, she had bound herself to them. She would now have to live by the harmony she professed. With the guardian's silent blessing, the way forward opened into a clearing where the air itself sparkled, charged with the gentle, waiting power of latent magic. The air in the meadow hummed with a palpable, gentle warmth. Elara stepped from the forest's edge into a sun-drenched expanse, where flowers bloomed in colors that had no name in her world, their petals holding light from within. With each step, the soft grass released a faint, sweet fragrance, and something more echoes, a ripple of carefree laughter, the distant, harmonious strain of a flute, the warm murmur of a gathered community. These were not sounds that struck her ears, but impressions that brushed directly against her spirit, fleeting and beautiful. She was not just learning about the Golden Age's harmony, she was walking through its living memory, bathing in its profound peace. The sheer, unforced joy of that lost time settled around her shoulders like a comforting cloak, and her connection to her goal transformed from an intellectual pursuit to a deep, emotional ache. This was what her village had forgotten. This was what her grandmother had tried to describe. The experience was both nourishing and painfully bittersweet, the vibrant wholeness of the past, casting the comparative fragmentation and quiet struggle of her own time into stark, heartbreaking relief. The contrast created a powerful tension within her, a mingling of profound joy for what had been and a sharp sense of loss for what was missing. Pausing beside a flower that shimmered with opalescent light, she made a quiet decision. She would not take this feeling for granted. With the utmost care, she gently collected a single, luminous petal, placing it securely within her grandmother's journal. It was not a trophy of her journey, but a physical anchor, a tangible piece of the beauty she was now sworn to help preserve. The weight of her mission shifted irrevocably. It was no longer just about recovering forgotten knowledge, but about the immense responsibility of carrying this feeling of harmony, this very essence of peace, back to her world. Her purpose felt heavier, more essential, and more deeply personal than ever before. As she reached the far end of the meadow, the path ended at a stone archway, its surface intricately carved with the intertwined symbols of the sun, the moon, and the earth, marking the final threshold to the whispering glade itself. The stone archway rose before her, its cool surface etched with the sun, the moon, and the earth, a silent testament to the balance she sought. At its apex rested a single, dormant crystal, clear and lifeless. This was the final lock, and the key was not a physical object, but a song, the specific, harmonious melody her grandmother had hummed to her so many times in childhood. It was a tune of pure, clear tones, a sequence of notes that had to be perfectly aligned, a living echo of the very harmony the glade protected. The conflict here was absolute and terrifyingly simple. If her memory failed, if her breath wavered even slightly, the crystal would remain dark, and the way would be sealed forever. All her steps, from the luminous stream to the guardian's test, would lead only to this impassable wall. Her entire journey and the hope of her village balanced on the purity of a single, remembered sound. Closing her eyes, Alara blocked out the world. She let the rustling leaves and her own thrumming heartbeat fade into a distant murmur. In that profound quiet, she reached not for a clever strategy, but for a feeling the warmth of her grandmother's embrace. the safety of the hearth, the unwavering love with which the melody had been given. She took a soft breath and began to hum. The notes rose, clear and resonant, a perfect replication of that inherited gift. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, a single point of light kindled deep within the crystal. It grew, pulsing in time with her song, until the entire archway shimmered, the stone itself becoming insubstantial as a morning mist. The path was open. As the archway parted, a wave of pure, warm light washed over her, carrying her into the heart of the ancient sanctuary. The soft moss pulsed with a gentle, living warmth beneath her hands. Light did not fall upon the glade from above, but bloomed from every leaf and petal, from the very air she breathed, a soft radiance that held no shadow. As Alara settled at its heart, a profound silence descended, a listening quiet that was broken not by sound, but by a sudden, rushing river of consciousness. Whispers that had been faint echoes in the meadow now became a torrent of clear, coherent thoughts, pouring into her mind. It was the collected memory of ages, the joy, the sorrow, the quiet triumphs of countless lives lived in deep connection. The pressure was immense, a tidal wave of perspectives and lifetimes, threatening to dissolve her own sense of self into the vast ocean of the past. Her breath hitched, her focus wavered on the edge of being swept entirely away. This was the final, most intimate test. To receive the wisdom, she had to remain fully present, an anchor in the now, or be lost forever in the echoes of what was. She clenched her hands in the moss, grounding herself in its tangible, living softness, and fought to hold onto the single thread of her own question, the one that had carried her this far. From the swirling cascade of knowledge, she shaped her plea, a focused thought sent into the current. How can we remember the harmony of the golden age in our time of haste? The flood did not cease, but it shifted. The countless whispers began to weave together, their voices merging into a single, resonant tone that felt both ancient and intimately close. It spoke not of epic battles or grand pronouncements, but of the humble, daily rhythm of a life lived with intention. The vision of the tapestry bloomed in her mind, its vibrant threads woven by an unseen artisan. Each strand, a different hue and texture, was chosen not for its individual brilliance, but for how it supported the whole. A single thread pulled too tight would distort the pattern, while one left too slack would create a gap. The artisan's hands moved with a patient, deliberate rhythm, understanding that the beauty of the final image depended entirely on this delicate, conscious balance. The lesson was not about the threads themselves, but about the space between them, the respectful tension that created a unified whole. Elara saw that societal harmony worked on the very same principle. It was not a demand for uniformity, but an invitation for every person to contribute their unique thread without seeking to dominate the entire loom. This was the practical wisdom behind the Golden Age's piece. The profound clarity of this understanding was immediately followed by a wave of daunting frustration. How could she possibly translate this beautiful, abstract principle to her village, where the loudest voices were always heard first, where the fastest hands were most valued, and where the very idea of slowing down to consider the collective pattern was seen as a weakness? They value the speed of the harvest, not the health of the soil that produced it. Presenting this as a philosophical rule, would only earn her blank stares or dismissive laughter. Her mind wrestled with the conflict, searching for a bridge between this ancient truth and her people's modern struggles. The solution, when it came, felt as natural as breathing. She would not deliver a lecture. She would tell a story. She would recount the tale of the weaver and the tapestry, making the wisdom accessible, memorable, and open to interpretation. The success of her entire mission now pivoted on this new, critical skill. It was no longer enough to have found the wisdom. She had to become its translator, its living voice. The stakes were no longer about her personal enlightenment, but about her ability to communicate a feeling that could heal her community's fractures. As the intricate vision of the loom gently faded, another scene began to form in its place. This one was of a simple, shared meal under a canopy of brilliant stars. The memory of the shared meal unfolded with a warmth that felt more real than the stone beneath her hands. Elara saw a long, rough-hewn table under a sky brilliant with stars, laden with simple, hearty food. A woman in worn robes placed a loaf of bread beside a dish offered by a man in elegant silks, their hands meeting over the platter with easy familiarity. Laughter flowed as freely as the drink, and stories were passed around the table like the most precious of offerings. No one was too important to serve, and no one was too humble to be heard. This was not a feast of extravagant wealth, but a celebration of shared sustenance, where every contribution, whether a basket of herbs or a freshly caught fish, was received with genuine gratitude. The harmony here was not an abstract ideal. It was a living, breathing reality built on the simple, profound pillars of equity and heartfelt thanks. A sharp pang of recognition, edged with guilt, twisted inside her. Her own village shared a harvest festival once a year, a loud, bustling event, but their daily lives were spent in separation. Families ate behind their own doors, their worries and joys contained within four walls. The slow erosion of their communal spirit had been so gradual, she had never even named it, accepting the quiet isolation as normal. She had been complacent, never questioning why they gathered only for ceremony and not for the simple, daily act of breaking bread together. This memory from the Glade held up a mirror, and the reflection was painfully clear. Their community was not broken by a single cataclysm, but by 1,000 small meals eaten alone. In that moment of stark clarity, a decision crystallized within her. She would not return home and simply speak of communal ideals. She would build one. Her first act would be to organize a feast, not in the formal square, but in a common field, inviting everyone to bring what they could and share in everything that was offered. It would be a practical demonstration, a living story of the principle she had just witnessed. The very thought sent a ripple of anxiety through her. How would she convince old man Hemlock, who prized his privacy above all, to sit on a blanket next to boisterous family from the valley? Could she persuade the busy potter to set aside her work for an evening of seemingly idle conversation? Her own standing in the village was that of a dreamer, and now she would have to leverage every bit of social capital she possessed, risking ridicule and rejection to mend a fracture no one else seemed to see. The memory of the shared laughter and effortless connection began to fade, but the feeling of belonging it left behind was a new kind of compass in her heart. As the vision of the feast dissolved, the whispers of the glade softened, turning from the warmth of community toward the deep, patient silence of the ancient forest that surrounded it. The whispers shifted from the warmth of community to the deep, patient hum of the earth itself. Alara felt her awareness sinking down through the soft moss, past the tangled roots, and into the cool, dark soil. She was not just hearing the land, she was learning its language. A sudden gust of wind was not merely air in motion, but a message carrying the scent of distant rain and a warning of a coming chill. The specific pattern of moss growing on the north side of an oak spoke of water flowing deep below, and the agitated chatter of squirrels was a clear report of a predator moving through the undergrowth. This was not magic in the way of fairy tales, but a refined, practical skill of observation and deep connection. The environment was not a collection of resources to be managed and consumed, but a living, breathing partner in a continuous, silent conversation. The health of the soil was its voice, and she was finally learning how to listen. The implications struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her village saw the land as a stubborn beast of burden, to be driven with the whip of fertilizer and the spur of the plow until it yielded its bounty. They fought for every bushel, never realizing that their struggle itself was a sign of a broken relationship. Their practices, which prioritize a large harvest this season at any cost, were actively silencing the very partner that provided for them. This wisdom did not feel like a distant philosophy, but an urgent, practical necessity. The conflict awaiting her at home was no longer abstract. She could already see the stubborn set of Farmer Brahm's jaw if she tried to tell him his methods were wrong. A direct lecture would be a disaster, alienating the very people whose cooperation she needed. So she made a quiet, crucial decision. She would not approach them as a teacher, but as a student. She would go into their fields, ask to learn their ways, and work beside them. Only once she understood their struggles and earned their trust could she gently point out the small signs they were missing: the compacted earth, the weary stillness of the birds, the subtle language of a tired land. The stakes were terrifyingly tangible. Her success or failure would not just be measured in her personal standing, but in the future vitality of the soil, the success of next year's plantings, and the long-term survival of the community itself. With this profound understanding settling like a seed in her heart, the glade presented its final, most personal gift, a mirror of self-reflection. The still pool in the glade's heart did not show her face. Instead, its surface shimmered with the living mosaic of her own life. She saw herself as a child, impatiently tugging her grandmother's sleeve to hurry a story along. She watched a recent memory unfold of her turning away with a dismissive sigh from a villager's long-winded complaint. Each scene was a small, sharp lesson in the discord she could create. But then another image surfaced, her quietly sharing her noon meal with a hungry traveler, her patient mending of a neighbor's fence without being asked. The pool presented no judgment, only a clear, unflinching record of her choices. The conflict raging within her was not with some external guardian, but with the reflection of her own imperfect self. She saw, with painful clarity, that her occasional impatience and quickness to judge were the very antithesis of the harmony she sought to bring home. A deep, uncomfortable shame washed over her, the kind that makes you want to look away. How could she possibly teach a village about balance when her own inner world was so often unsettled. The personal stakes felt absolute. To offer wisdom without first embodying it would make her a hollow vessel, her words ringing with hypocrisy. Her entire mission would crumble not from external opposition, but from this internal inconsistency. She made a silent, solemn vow there at the water's edge. She would approach her own flaws with the same dedication she would apply to learning a new craft. Patience and empathy would become her daily practice, skills to be honed with conscious effort. This was the true foundation, the first and most essential stone upon which any external harmony must be built. As she fully accepted this difficult truth, a profound calm settled over her. The Glade's gentle light seemed to gather around her, not as a farewell, but as an affirmation, softly guiding her back toward the Stone Archway and the world that awaited her return. The path through the silent forest no longer felt like a trial. Alara walked with a new, quiet confidence, her steps sure and her heart open. She paused before the ancient guardian tree, placing a hand on its rough bark, not in supplication, but in gratitude. A deep, resonant warmth flowed back into her palm, a silent farewell between old friends. The forest itself seemed to part for her, the once intimidating shadows now offering cool, pleasant shade, and the distant animal calls sounding like cheerful acknowledgments of her passage. She was no longer an intruder, but a recognized part of this ancient world, and the belonging she felt made the journey back feel swift and effortless. Yet, with every step that brought her closer to the village, a new weight settled on her shoulders. The profound peace of the Glade was a stark contrast to the predictable skepticism of her community. How could she possibly explain the feeling of a shared meal under the stars to people who barely greeted each other in the street? The sheer scale of the change needed felt paralyzing. Her mind raced, trying to plan a dozen grand gestures at once, until she consciously stilled her thoughts. She would not attempt to rebuild the entire tapestry in a day. She would start with a single, strong thread. The communal feast was that thread, a tangible, achievable first step that required no complex explanations, only a shared space and an open invitation. This decision calmed her rising anxiety, transforming the overwhelming mission into a series of manageable actions. The true test was no longer about finding wisdom, but about planting its seed in resistant soil. Her role had fundamentally shifted from that of a seeker to a bridge, and the success of this transition now carried the weight of her entire journey. As the dense trees began to thin, the familiar scent of wood smoke from village hearth fires reached her, a signal that the time for learning was over and the work of sharing had begun. The familiar scent of wood smoke and freshly turned earth was a welcome anchor, but the first face she saw was a wall of pure skepticism. Kale, the village council head, stood with his arms crossed, his expression etched with the weary pragmatism of a man who measured value in bushels and repaired fences. "So you have returned from chasing shadows, Elara," he said, his voice carrying across the common green and drawing the attention of others. "We have real work here. Fields that need tending and storerooms that need filling. What practical help do your whispers and glades offer us?" The challenge was public and direct, a test not of her stories, but of her very presence. A younger Alara would have flared with defensive anger, but the stillness of the Glade remained within her. She met his gaze, her own calm and unwavering. She did not speak of luminous streams or sentient trees. Instead, she offered a simple invitation. The greatest wisdom I found, Kale, is that some truths are felt, not just explained. Come to a feast in the high field at moonrise tomorrow. Bring nothing but your presence and see what you feel. It was not an argument, but an opening. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent battle between his world of tangible tasks and her world of intangible connection. Her entire credibility, the worth of her long and difficult journey, now hinged on this single gathering. After a long, considering silence, Kale gave a single, curt nod. "I will come," he said, though his tone held no promise of belief. His agreement was all she needed, a crack in the door of doubt, through which a new kind of light could hopefully shine. The air in the high field was cool, the moon a bright coin against a velvet sky. Elara stood before her assembled neighbors, her heart thrumming like a captured bird. The laughter and shared food of the feast had created a fragile warmth, a temporary bridge, but now she had to cross it. All around her were the faces of people who measured truth by the weight of a harvest sack and the solidity of a stone wall. Would they see the story of the Loom as she did, a map to a better way, or would they dismiss it as a child's fantasy? Proving Kale right, she took a slow breath, feeling the stillness of the glade settle within her, and began to speak. Her voice, at first a little unsteady, carried over the quieting crowd. She told them of an ancient artisan, seated before a great and empty loom. She described the countless threads, each a different color and strength, some rough and sturdy, others fine and delicate. She spoke not of magic, but of choice, of how the weaver selected each strand, not for its beauty alone, but for how it would support the ones beside it, how a thread pulled too tight would pucker the whole cloth, and one left too loose would leave a gaping hole. The beauty, she explained, was not in any single thread, but in the respectful tension between them all, the way they all worked together to create a single, magnificent image. As she spoke, she looked at them, at the potter with her strong, clay-stained hands, at the farmer who knew the language of the soil, at the baker whose work nourished them all. She made the story theirs. A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd, not of dissent, but of recognition. They were the threads. Their village was the tapestry. The story was no longer about a distant myth. It was a mirror held up to their own lives, and for the first time, they were truly looking. The nervous flutter in her chest transformed into a steady, resonant certainty. She had not just told a story, she had planted a seed. But as the feast ended and people drifted away in thoughtful, talking pairs, a new weight settled on her. The looks they gave her now were different, less skeptical, more expectant. They had felt the truth in the tale, and now they were waiting to see what came next. The story had opened a door, and they were waiting for her to show them how to walk through it. Encouraged by their response, Alara knew the next step was to move from story to action, to bring the wisdom into their daily lives. The morning after the feast found Elara not in the storyteller's circle, but standing at the edge of the community's failing apple orchard. The trees were a heartbreaking sight, their leaves curled and spotted with a rusty blight, the few remaining fruits small and bitter. The farmers, led by a weary man named Brahm, were arguing over which potent treatment to try next, their voices tight with frustration and fear. This orchard was not just a crop, it was a vital source of food and cider, and its decline felt like a slow bleeding of the village's vitality. Alara took a steadying breath and walked toward them. She suggested they try something different, something that felt, to their ears, like doing nothing at all. She asked them to spend the day not fighting the land, but listening to it. Brahm scoffed, his hands clenched into fists. A day of watching insects and feeling the wind is a day we do not have to waste, he declared. We need action, not more of your strange stories. The tension was a physical wall between their methods. Alara did not argue. Instead, she simply sat down at the orchard's edge, her gaze sweeping over the tired soil and the struggling trees. She began to point out small, quiet details he had missed: the particular pattern of the blight on the leaves facing the north wind, the unusual absence of earthworms near the surface, the way the birds avoided the highest branches. Her observations were not accusations, but gentle invitations to see. Slowly, reluctantly, Brahm and the others joined her, their initial impatience giving way to a grudging curiosity as the morning wore on. Elara worked right beside them, her hands as soil-stained as theirs, proving this was not a passive retreat, but a deeper, more focused form of labor. The true breakthrough came when one of the younger farmers, lying on his stomach to watch a line of ants, noticed something they had all walked past for seasons. A small, seasonal stream that should have fed the orchard's soil was silently choked with debris and diverted by a recent rock slide, its life-giving water now flowing uselessly away from the thirsty roots. It was a simple, physical problem with a simple, physical fix, one their frantic applications of treatments had completely blinded them to. The realization was a quiet thunderclap. In their hurry to force a solution, they had been ignoring the land's own clear plea for help. The health of this vital food source was now inextricably linked to the success of Alara's quiet method, and the relief that washed over the farmers was palpable. As they worked together to clear the stream, and the first trickles of water began to seep back toward the orchard, even Brahm looked at Alara with a new, unspoken respect. The proof was no longer in a story she told, but in the land itself, beginning its slow journey back to life. The feast of sharing had planted a seed, but Alara knew a single meal could not change a culture. The village meetings were the true battleground, where the loudest voices had always shaped the future, leaving the quietest minds unheard. She proposed a new way, a council of voices, where each person would be given a turn to speak without interruption, a turn to place their thread into the community tapestry. Kale's face tightened as she explained the process, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the common table. "This will take all night," he argued, his voice a low rumble of impatience. "We have decisions to make, not stories to hear from every soul." The air in the meeting hall grew thick with the tension of this power dynamic struggle, a silent contest between the old way of swift command and this new, untested path of collective wisdom. Elara did not argue with his logic. Instead, she took her place as a gentle but unwavering facilitator for those first few meetings, when the elderly weaver, a woman who usually kept her eyes on her lap, began to softly voice an idea about mending the fishing nets with a stronger knot. Kale tried to cut in with a practical objection. Elara simply raised a hand, her gaze calm but firm, and reminded the room of the one rule. The weaver finished her thought, and a young fisher, who had been struggling with constant repairs, suddenly sat up straight. "That would work," he said, his voice filled with surprise. "I never would have thought of that." It was a small victory, but its impact was profound. A new, practical solution had surfaced from a source they had ignored for seasons, and the decision to implement it felt, for the first time, genuinely supported by the whole group. Kale watched these moments unfold, his initial frustration slowly giving way to a grudging, bewildered respect. He saw the shy farmer's wife propose a system for sharing tools that saved everyone time, and the quiet woodcarver suggest a design for a new grain storage bin that better protected against damp. These were not just ideas, they were pieces of a stronger, more resilient community being built before his eyes. The authority was not being taken from him, but shared with him, and the decisions they reached together carried a weight and legitimacy his solitary decrees never had. The stakes were absolute, a quiet revolution reshaping the very structure of their governance. Success meant a village united not by command, but by genuine collaboration, capable of weathering any hardship. Failure would fracture them more deeply than ever, proving that their old divisions were too strong to overcome. This new practice of listening, of truly hearing one another, began to mend frayed relationships that had been worn thin by years of being overlooked. One respectful conversation at a time, the fabric of the community grew stronger, its pattern richer and more intricate than anyone could have woven alone. The children's laughter became a new kind of music in the village, but Alara noticed how it often died when they were called to their daily chores. She saw the way their small shoulders slumped at the mention of weeding or water fetching, tasks they viewed as tedious interruptions to their play. So one afternoon, she gathered them under the great oak at the edge of the common green and did not give them a list of duties. Instead, she taught them a song. It was a simple, catchy melody, each verse mapping to a season. The spring verse spoke of turning the soil and planting seeds with gentle hands. The summer verse celebrated the long days of watering and weeding, while the autumn stanza was a joyful chant for the harvest and the sharing of the bounty. Even winter had its part, a quiet, humming refrain about mending tools, telling stories by the fire, and letting the earth rest. The song transformed the annual cycle of work into a shared, joyful ritual. Soon, you could hear the children singing as they carried water, their steps lighter, their movements dancing as they acted out the verses. They began to see their chores not as isolated burdens, but as essential notes in a beautiful, natural rhythm, each task having its proper time and its own reason for being. This new attitude was infectious, and they carried it home, humming while they swept the hearth or cheerfully racing to see who could gather the most kindling. Not everyone welcomed this change, however. A few parents watched with deepening concern. Brahm's wife, Lena, voiced the worry shared by several. All this singing and play, she fretted to Elara one evening. It will make them soft. They need to learn that work is serious, that duty is not a game. How will they ever become strong, capable adults if they are dancing through their responsibilities? This was a fundamental conflict, a deeply held belief that joy and diligence were opposing forces, that for work to have value, it must feel like a struggle. Alara understood that a direct argument would only solidify their fear, so she made a gentle decision. She invited the concerned parents to a learning circle, not as critics, but as witnesses. She had the children perform their song, and then she posed them practical questions straight from the verses. What do we do when the first buds appear on the apple trees? A dozen small voices chimed in unison, with the correct answer from the spring stanza. How do we prepare the seed grain for storage? The autumn verse provided the clear, step-by-step reply. The parents watched, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to surprise, as they saw that the children who sang while they worked not only remembered their tasks more completely, but also took a visible pride in executing them well. The song was not a distraction, it was a memory aid and a source of meaning. The stakes in this quiet moment were immense, touching the very future of the village. Instilling these values in the children was the essential key to making the newfound harmony last for generations. It was about weaving a new cultural identity, one where responsibility and joy were intertwined, ensuring that the wisdom of balance would not be lost again when the elders were gone. The sound of children singing while they worked soon became a new, hopeful melody woven into the daily life of the village, a living promise for the future. The harvest moon hung like a ripe fruit in the evening sky, casting a warm glow over the preparations when Kale found Alara alone by the storehouse. The usual firm set of his shoulders was gone, replaced by a weary slope she had never seen before. His voice, when he spoke, was low and stripped of its authority. "I was wrong to stand against you," he began, the words clearly difficult. "My doubt was not about you, but about myself. For so long, my only duty was to protect this village from loss. I saw your hope as a risk I could not allow, a distraction from the hard, certain work of survival." He looked out at the bustling, laughing community, a sight that had once seemed like chaos to him, but now felt like life itself. I was guarding them from a dream, only to realize I was keeping them in a lesser world. This admission, raw and unguarded, dissolved the final wall of resistance that had stood between the old ways and the new. In that vulnerable moment, Kale was not a council head giving a decree, but a man rediscovering his own home. Elara did not smile in triumph. She met his honesty with her own, sharing the deep fear she had carried through the entire journey, the countless times she had almost turned back, convinced the elders were right. "Your caution was not a weakness, Kale," she said gently. "It was a necessary anchor. Now we need that same care to build something that will last, to ensure these changes are woven strongly into our lives, not just scattered like seeds on stone." With his influence now firmly aligned with her vision, their combined leadership created a powerful, united front. The entire energy of the village shifted, the scope of their mission expanding from a series of small repairs to the transformation of their very community model. The stakes were now absolute, aiming not merely for improvement, but for a lasting legacy. United in this new purpose, their attention turned naturally to the village's annual harvest festival, seeing in the traditional celebration the perfect canvas for a grand demonstration of their new old ways. The harvest festival became their loom, and every villager a willing thread. Alara and Kale stood at the center of the planning, their partnership a new and sometimes awkward dance. He saw a schedule of efficient tasks, while she envisioned an organic flow of shared experience. When disagreements arose over the order of events or the allocation of supplies, the old impulse to command warred with the new need to collaborate. The sheer scale of the event threatened to overwhelm their fledgling system, exposing the lingering disorganization of a community unaccustomed to working on such a grand, collective scale. The risk was palpable. A poorly executed festival would not just be a disappointment, It would be a very public failure of the very principles they were trying to embody. It would prove to every skeptic that the old, divided ways were simply more practical, so they made a crucial decision. They would not micromanage. Instead, they empowered small groups, trusting the bakers to organize the shared meal, the woodworkers to build the game stalls, and the elders to curate the storytelling circle. This delegation was an act of profound faith, fostering a powerful sense of shared ownership. The entire village green transformed into a vibrant tapestry of purposeful activity. On the day of the festival, the air itself seemed to shimmer with a palpable lightness. Laughter flowed more freely than the cider, and the collaborative games, where success depended on partnership rather than individual victory, dissolved old rivalries into shared triumph. As the great communal meal began, the act of passing a dish to a neighbor became a quiet ceremony, a tangible expression of the balance they were learning to live. The joyful, united atmosphere was the most potent evidence they could have offered. It was the remembered harmony of the Golden Age, no longer a distant echo, but a living, breathing reality. When the last embers of the festival fire glowed like a cluster of low-hanging stars, a deep, contented silence settled over the villagers. It was a silence filled not with emptiness, but with a profound, unspoken connection, a shared understanding that they had not just held a celebration, but had woven a new pattern for their lives. The idea for the tapestry bloomed not from a single voice, but from the shared soil of their experience. It was the elderly weaver herself, her hands still nimble from a lifetime at the loom, who first gave the thought a name. "We have the story of the loom," she said, her voice soft but clear in the council circle. "Why do we not weave our own? Let us make a cloth that holds our history, so our children's children can see the path we have walked." The proposal was met with an immediate, resonant hum of agreement. This would be more than art. It would be a testament, a physical anchor for the new harmony they were carefully building. The great wooden loom was brought into the center of the common hall, and the work began. At first, the process was a joyous symphony of collaboration. The spinners prepared the wool, the dyers boiled roots and berries for color, and everyone, from the smallest child to the most reserved elder, was invited to contribute a stitch. The act of weaving side by side became a quiet, daily ritual of unity, their movements a silent conversation. Yet, as the first images began to take form on the warp and weft, the first true test of their new principles emerged. A fierce debate erupted over how to depict the years of hardship. Some argued for a section of muted, somber grays, a visual representation of the struggle and the toll it had taken. Others, however, felt this would dishonor the memory of those difficult times, making their past seem only a shadow. They pushed for threads of gold to be woven through the gray, to show that resilience and hope had always been present, even then. The disagreement was not merely artistic, it was deeply personal, touching old wounds and individual memories of loss. The loom fell silent as the argument grew, the unfinished tapestry, a stark reminder of how easily a single, pulled thread could unravel their progress. Elara watched the conflict unfold, her heart tightening. She did not step in as an arbiter, but as a guide for a different way. She gathered them around the growing cloth and asked a simple, profound question. Can a story hold more than one truth at once? She invited each person to share not just their opinion on the color, but the memory and the feeling behind it. As they listened, truly listened to the sorrow in one voice and the defiant hope in another, the solution became clear. They would not choose one truth over the other. They would weave them together. The section representing their past struggles would be a complex blend of deep gray and shining gold. The dark and light threads intertwined to create a richer, more honest picture. This act of creative compromise, of honoring multiple perspectives within a single image, was a more powerful lesson than any story could convey. The stakes for the finished work were now immense. This tapestry would hang in their common hall for generations, a permanent covenant. It would silently ask every future villager if they, too, could hold space for another's thread, for another's version of the truth. As the final stitches were placed, depicting their feast under the stars and the restored orchard heavy with fruit, the villagers saw their shared identity reflected back at them. It was a story not of perfect harmony, but of graceful collaboration, a beautiful record of how they learned to listen, and in listening, learned to weave themselves back together. The great tapestry was complete, a vibrant declaration of their shared journey, and Alara felt a quiet shift within her. She watched as a young mother, once too shy to speak in a gathering, confidently led the children in their seasonal song. She saw Kale listening with genuine interest as the potter explained a new design for communal water jars. The community was no longer following her lead. It was breathing the wisdom on its own. And so, she began to consciously step back. At the next storytelling circle, she did not take her usual seat at the center. Instead, she gestured for the elderly weaver to begin, her own presence a supportive shadow in the firelight. She encouraged others to organize the planting rotations and the feast days, offering guidance only when asked. New leaders emerged from the most unexpected places, their voices strong and sure, weaving their own unique threads into the community's growing fabric. This was the true goal, to make the harmony self-sustaining, no longer dependent on a single storyteller's memory. Yet, a hollow ache bloomed in Alara's chest during those quiet moments. After being the center of this profound change, this return to the periphery felt strangely like a loss, a whisper of insignificance, wondered if she was becoming irrelevant in the very story she had helped to write. The conflict was internal and deeply personal, a struggle to redefine her purpose now that the great quest was over. She had to learn the difficult art of guiding from the sidelines, of offering a suggestion without needing it to be followed, of watching others interpret the wisdom in ways she herself had never imagined. She made a conscious decision to see this not as a demotion, but as an evolution. Her new role was that of a mentor and a gentle resource, and she trained herself to find a deeper, more resonant joy in the success of others. The future of their hard-won peace depended entirely on this transition. If the harmony lived and died with her, then it was not truly harmony at all, but merely another echo waiting to fade. It had to outlive its initial champion to be considered a genuine success. With her purpose evolving, Alara felt a new pull, a need to ensure the stories themselves would never be lost again. She took out her grandmother's journal, its pages now filled with her own notes, and she began to write. The blank pages of her grandmother's journal held a new kind of silence, waiting not for received myths, but for a story still being lived. Elara dipped her quill, feeling the immense responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was not just recording events, she was crafting a bridge to the future, and every word had to carry the weight of truth. The greatest danger, she realized, would be to write a perfect, polished legend. If she presented their journey as a flawless fairy tale, future generations would find it beautiful but utterly impossible to replicate. Her conflict was with the very nature of memory itself, the temptation to smooth over the arguments, the failures, and the moments of pure doubt that had made their success so hard-won. She made a conscious decision. This would not be a doctrine. It would be a guidebook woven with stories, a collection of practical lessons learned through trial and error. She wrote of Kale's initial resistance with as much care as she wrote of the feast, and she detailed the exact missteps they had made in the orchard before they learned to listen to the land. The Chronicle's value lay in its honest imperfections, its admission that harmony is not a static state to be achieved, but a continuous practice to be nurtured. The stakes for this physical book were terrifyingly high. It was a seed, and if it was not planted in fertile minds, if its lessons were not adapted and reinterpreted for new challenges, the wisdom would once again retreat into the realm of forgotten fables. Its preservation became a communal duty, with copies made and the original placed in the common hall for all to study. Visitors from other villages began to arrive, drawn by rumors of a community reborn, and they would sit with the Chronicle, not to copy rules, but to understand the spirit behind the practices. With the final entry written, a simple account of the children singing as they planted the winter barley, she closed the book. Its leather cover was now warm with the accumulated energy of their shared life. She placed it gently on the shelf beside her grandmother's, knowing that her greatest work was no longer contained within its pages, but was breathing and growing in the vibrant, living community all around her. The years had woven silver into Alara's hair and a deep, abiding peace into her spirit. Her days now followed the gentle rhythm of the sun, often spent in the quiet sanctuary of her garden. She tended the soil with the same patient attention she had once offered the village, her hands more often in the earth than raised in pronouncement. She had become a listener, an elder available for counsel under the broad oak, her leadership expressed not through commands, but through the quiet example of a life lived in balance. The village itself had learned to breathe in this new rhythm. Its cycles of work and celebration flowed into one another like the verses of a well-known song, the people generally more content and supportive, their lives interwoven in a sturdy, resilient fabric. This did not mean an absence of trouble. A disagreement over shared tools could still spark a heated word, and a sudden summer blight could threaten a season's work. These were the constant, low-level tests of their resilience, the small disputes and bad seasons that life inevitably brings. Yet now, when conflict arose, the community did not fracture. They had the tools to navigate the hardship, turning to their council of voices or recalling the lesson of the tapestry, where different threads could create a stronger whole. Elara watched these moments unfold from a respectful distance, her heart calm. She made a conscious choice to intervene only when her guidance was explicitly sought, trusting the community to manage itself. This demonstrated her deepest faith in the system they had built together, a system designed to function without a single, central voice. The enduring nature of their peace was the final, and most important, stake. It had to prove it could withstand not just a single crisis, but the slow, relentless test of time and the inevitable, unknown challenges of the future. Sitting in her garden one afternoon, she watched the village children at play. They were not simply running, but moving in a patterned dance, their joyful shouts forming the words to the song of the seasons. It was a perfect, unconscious echo of the harmony she had helped them remember, a melody now so deeply woven into their lives that the children breathed it in with the very air. A stranger's shadow fell across the sun-warmed stones of the common green. He stood with the weary posture of one who had walked for many days, his clothes dusty and his eyes holding a deep, searching light. The villagers' cheerful work slowed to a halt, their easy chatter fading into a watchful silence. The man's gaze found Alara, and he spoke with a voice roughened by the road. "I come from a place where the soil will no longer sing," he said. "We have heard a story that here, the old harmony still lives. Can you help us remember?" Elara felt the weight of his words settle, not just on her, but on the entire village. This was the moment their quiet success ceased to be only their own. The wisdom was never meant to be hoarded like grain in a storehouse. It was a seed meant to be carried on the wind. Yet as the initial surprise faded, a murmur of concern rippled through the community. That evening, the Council of Voices gathered with a new and urgent tension. "What if they drain our resources?" one farmer asked, his voice tight with the memory of past scarcities. "We have worked so hard for this peace. Will we lose it by giving it away?" Another worried that their methods, so carefully tailored to their own land and people, would be misunderstood or misapplied, bringing not help but further confusion. The fear was a tangible presence in the room, the old instinct to protect their fragile bounty, warring with the new principle of open-handed sharing. Alara listened to every voice, her own heart divided between a fierce desire to protect what they had built and a profound conviction that to refuse this request would betray the very harmony they cherished. She did not argue for one side over the other. Instead, she reframed the question, guiding them to see it not as a burden, but as the next logical step in their own story. "If a single thread fears weakening the tapestry by touching another," she asked softly, "then how does the cloth ever grow?" The discussion that followed was long and earnest, a true test of their collaborative spirit. In the end, the decision was collective. They would welcome the traveler, share their stories, and offer whatever practical guidance they could. They would become a beacon, not a fortress. This choice instantly raised the stakes of their entire endeavor. The potential to heal a wider world was now balanced against the very real risk of overextending their own community, of seeing their carefully nurtured peace stretched thin by the needs of others. Later, as the first stars pricked the darkening sky, Alara sat with the visitor on the same patch of grass where their first feast had been held. He looked up at the constellations, the same ones that had witnessed the ancient feasts of the Glade, and a quiet hope eased the worry from his face. Elara took a slow breath, feeling the familiar stillness of the story gather within her. "Let me tell you about a whispering glade," she began, her voice a gentle thread, connecting his hardship to the source of all they had learned. Her gnarled fingers, etched with the map of a long and purposeful life, pressed a single seed into the waiting earth. The soil was cool and rich, smelling of rain and renewal. All around Alara, the community moved in a synchronized, quiet rhythm, their hands performing the same simple, sacred act. Grandparents, parents, and children, 3 generations kneeling together in the shared field, each placing a promise of future sustenance into the ground with a reverence that had become as natural as breathing. There was no fanfare, no recited creed, only the profound silence of a practice so deeply woven into their lives that it was now instinct. This was the legacy of the whispering glade, no longer a story told, but a truth lived in the bending of a back and the offering of a seed. The gentle tension in the air was not one of conflict, but of sustained attention, a collective mindfulness against the easy distraction of the mundane. It was the continuous, quiet choice to find the extraordinary within the ordinary, to see the planting of a bean not as a chore, but as a conversation with the future. As the last seeds were nestled into their rows, a hush fell, the moment ripe for the final blessing. Alara's eyes, clouded with age but still bright with understanding, swept over the faces turned toward her. They held an unspoken question, a readiness to receive the words that had opened their planting for so many years. But instead of speaking them herself, she turned slowly, her movements a deliberate ceremony. She knelt, the soft earth yielding beneath her knees, and gently took the small, soil-dusted hand of a young girl standing beside her. Looking into the child's wide, earnest eyes, she placed the girl's palm over her own heart, letting her feel the steady, patient rhythm within. Then, with infinite care, she guided the small hand to rest upon the newly planted row. The blessing did not need to be spoken aloud, for it was transferred in that touch, a silent passing of guardianship from her weary spirit to one just beginning its journey. The stake in this quiet moment was the eternal cycle itself, the fragile, essential flame of wisdom that must be handed carefully from one generation to the next before the wind of time can extinguish it. Her work felt complete, a perfect circle from seeker to keeper to passer on of the light. The sky bruised to a deep, angry purple in the space of a single breath. A cold wind, sharp with the scent of ozone, swept across the fields, whipping the newly planted rows into a frenzy. The storm did not announce itself with a gentle rumble, but with a sudden, deafening crack that shook the very ground. Hail, hard and white as stone, began to fall, pelting the tender green shoots and threatening to flatten a season of hope in mere moments. Panic, a palpable force, surged through the villagers as they rushed from their homes. This was more than a test of their crops. It was a direct assault on the fragile spirit they had so carefully nurtured. Shouts of fear and frustration were torn away by the gale, and for a terrible instant, the old impulses took hold. The instinct to retreat, to protect only one's own, to see the disaster as a sign that their efforts had been in vain. In the midst of this chaos, Elara emerged. She moved slowly, her form frail against the lashing rain, but her presence was an anchor. She did not raise her arms to command the sky, nor did she shout orders. She simply walked into the heart of the maelstrom, into the field that was their collective future, and turned to face her people. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the storm's roar with a startling clarity. It was the first note of the song of the seasons. At first, it was a solitary thread against the overwhelming noise. Then, another voice joined hers, wavering but determined. Then another, and another. One by one, the villagers stopped their frantic attempts to cover the plants with mere hands and joined the song. They were not singing for a miracle. They were singing for each other, their voices weaving a shelter of shared, resolve stronger than any physical barrier. They worked in rhythm with the melody, moving together to lay protective cloths where they could, to channel the rushing water away from the most vulnerable rows, their movements becoming a coordinated dance of preservation. The hail lessened, giving way to a relentless, cold rain, but the song continued, a warm hum against the chill. They could not save every shoot, and the sight of the damaged field was a sharp ache in every heart. Yet as they stood there, soaked and weary, their voices united, a new understanding settled upon them. The true harvest they were protecting was not just in the ground, it was standing right beside them in the storm. Their harmony was not a fair weather comfort, but a resilient practice that held firm even when the world turned fierce. The storm eventually passed, leaving a bruised but quiet world behind. The sun broke through the retreating clouds, illuminating the soaked, glistening field and the tired, steadfast community within it. They had faced nature's fury, not as isolated individuals, but as a single, living entity, and in doing so, they had proven that the Golden Age was not a lost era to be remembered, but a strength to be lived, moment by moment, even in the rain. The storms passing left the air washed clean and thick with the scent of wet earth. Exhausted but united, the villagers gathered in the soft, gray light of the common green, their quiet murmurs a testament to shared endurance rather than despair. Elara stood among them, her gaze moving slowly across the faces. She loved the weathered hands of the farmers, the steady eyes of the weavers, the bright, curious glances of the children who had sung through the hail. A deep and quiet satisfaction settled in her heart, not because they had saved every plant, for they had not, but because they had held fast to one another. They had not built a perfect world, safe from all hardship. They had built a resilient and kind one, capable of bending without breaking. The fabled harmony of the Golden Age was no longer a story locked in the past, a beautiful relic to be yearned for. It lived here, in their mud-streaked clothes and tired smiles, in the conscious choice to listen, to share, and to sing even when the sky fell. Her own long journey, from a seeker of whispers to a keeper of quiet truths, felt complete. Yet as she watched a young girl gently press a trampled leaf back into the soil, she understood that this was not an ending. It was a breath held between one chapter and the next. The community's story, now richly woven with ancient wisdom and modern hope, was just beginning its next telling, ready to be carried forward on the voices of the next generation.